Well, thank you, Stephen, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I know we have folks from across a number of time zones, and I'm excited to be here with Sandra today.
It's nice to see everyone. I work with Kanika. I think you see her a little bit more than you see me.
Yes, so Sandra and I, just like Stephen mentioned, we'll be talking about the visualization of data, and Kanika as well is an expert in this space. So I think we'll run through our presentation. We'll have time for questions. I know you have a number of us in the room who could definitely speak to questions as they arise. So it's so great to have such a wonderful group here today. To get us going now, so I know y'all have requested data visualization as one of the topics for this collaborative. So that's where this presentation's origin is. So there's so many different things you could talk about with visualizing data, from how to use specific tools to good processes, good practices. And there's so much, it could be hours upon hours of trainings, one-on-ones, walkthroughs, so much. So since today we haven't about an hour, we decided on what the most useful place to start is understand the process. So from when you first have a request of, hey, I want this visualization, to what should it look like, to building it, to getting feedback, to calling it done. What is that arc of work? How does that look? What's the sequence of it? What are important things you should think about along the way? So you really have that framework and scaffolding. So when you do have your next visualization, whether it's your first, your second, or your next of many, you kind of have that mental schema to make the process easier for you, and you're not reinventing the wheel every time, or at least hopefully not too much every time. So that's our goal for today. Sandra, would you add anything to that before we move in?
Yeah, Matt and I had previously done a Power BI hands-on training, and that was recorded. So that's actually linked at the bottom of this. So this is definitely more of a theoretical approach, but if you'd like more of a hands-on, how do I physically make a dashboard in Power BI, we have that recording. And we're also happy, which we'll discuss later, to set up some later how to actually do it trainings. But as Matt said, these are kind of hard lessons learned, I think, on a lot of people's part, definitely mine, about how to start with visualizations. So with that, Matt, do you want to take it away?
Excellent, and yes to everything you said, I agree. So first, we just want to start with, why do people want data visualizations? And a lot of times, folks, the immediate things come to mind of like dashboards and maps, but what's the why behind it? I mean, a lot of the time it's to tell a story. So what's the story in this case? This is a map of telling the story of ECHO's participation in New Mexico. So as we were trying to report on our HUBS programs, just how can we enrich and tell and convey the story of our reach in New Mexico? So that's one of the big ones. Sandra.
And this is an ECHO Chicago external dashboard. And one of the items here is that this is meant for an external audience to show impact. It's updated every quarter. Another part is that with this dashboard, you can't click on things and drill down, to too much data, right? It's more flat. And an external audience, this is more for marketing. So they can't slice and dice and figure out, a physician, in SMI versus a physician in hypertension, right? They can only go so far.
And so those are two of the most forefront of mind examples when people talk about visualizations. But there's a few other types as well. Sometimes a really effective table that can turn a lot of data into something more useful, or a really effective small chart or small graph that takes a whole bunch and reformats it, transforms it, and makes it readable, understandable, and conveyable, is another type of data visualization that folks usually don't think of. In this case, for our reporting here in New Mexico, every year when we have our legislative session, we take a whole bunch of our IACO data, slice, dice, and transform it into a really quick table to help understand which every district in our state, what's that district, who's the senator, and how much attendance have we had in their district, so that when we're going up to the legislature, we can convey that quickly and maybe know who to focus on, and maybe who some of our biggest supporters will be. A lot of folks may not think of this as a data visualization, but it really is. It's taking a whole bunch, simplifying it, and making it useful for you to take action with. So that's another type. And then the last examples that a lot of folks need it for is to build a buzz. So data visualization, a really common way that it's used is in marketing. So in this case, this is just an example of an infographic. But a lot of times you're doing marketing, recruiting, and just trying to get people to understand what your programs are and support you. And a lot of times data visualization is a core part of that, like from adding a map to an infographic to some charts to some big key numbers. It's maybe not the traditional way that people think of data visualization, but the key of it is making that data understandable, useful, and eye-catching. So those are just to get you thinking about the main ways and the main reasons why people often want things like data visualization and the main ways that they're used. I'm going to turn it over to you, Sandra, though, to outline where we're going from here and what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, so today we just really wanted to speak to people who might just be starting out on their, creating a dashboard journey. So if you're getting a lot of requests for, I'd love a dashboard summarizing, all of the things, then that's what we're kind of talking about today. So this is how you're going to start. I'm not going to read through these, A, because I hate it when people read slides, and B, because we're actually going to dive into each of these points through time. But this is more the process of someone says, hey, I want a visualization that shows me, just a summary view, and this is how we're going to start. So the next slide is about discovery. This is actually the part that most people kind of, it's really easy to let this part go. What you want to do is you want to make sure you front load your talking to people rather than someone says, I'd like, a dashboard that summarizes the state of our program. Well, who's going to be looking at that? It's a lot different if it's leadership. Are we hitting enrollment? How is our enrollment looking? Do we have targets? Should we set targets? And then operational questions are completely different. For instance, like what are our health centers that are particularly taking part in our pediatric versus adult series? And then also giving feedback to our facilitators. At Echo Chicago, we have a cohort model, which is a little different than a lot of the continuous Echo models. But no matter what, we want to give feedback to our facilitators about, how are things going? How are my, self-efficacy scores back to the facilitator? And then, of course, your external, selling your Echo program via marketing. So maybe the first three there, leadership, operations, facilitators, maybe you also want to be able to manipulate the data in Power BI. But if you're trying to build a buzz or you're just making a pamphlet for external partners, you want it to be more flat, no slicing and dicing capability. And the other part is that what this really comes down to is and the rest of the presentation is pretty much going to go to the message of you want to limit your scope for that initial dashboard. You want to have the right answers for the right audience at the right time. Just like Echo always says, the right care for the right patient at the right time. It's really the same idea. So make sure you spend your time on doing that. And that's really just a conversation with who's going to be looking at the dashboard. So the next step tells us about what is your timeline on the next slide. So if they say next week, and you laugh and they're like, no, really, we want to see something next week. So then after you have a heart attack and go for a mocha, to recover, you need to be clear. And I just want to say, I am always wrong with my timelines. Like if there's a time when I've been correct about my timeline, it's like amazing and I go out to dinner. So, but you do at least want to be realistic with yourself and others. You don't want to overpromise. So there's always going to be some give and take there. You're never going to get it perfectly right, but at least from your standpoint now, just don't overpromise. So the steps we're talking about today will save you time, right? Rather than freaking out and trying to make a dashboard that dances and changes colors like in a week. It's going to be a train wreck. You're going to be frustrated. The person's not going to like it. Okay. So the next slide. You also need someone who can be your go-to for questions in context. If this is your CEO, or for instance, like your the head of your department, your medical department, this isn't going to happen. So you need someone else that you can talk to. It could be someone who has a really good idea. It can be, like your executive director, if it's not, the director of your entire organization. Someone who you can bounce ideas off of, who you can sort of design what that first dashboard prototype should look like and move on in an efficient way. Okay, and the next slide.
And building off of that, so that first prototype is really your first step. So you've scoped out what's our question we're trying to answer, who's our go-to person for those questions, and you have your framework. The best next step is just to take out a piece of paper with that main contact or whoever your main customers are and literally sit down and sketch it out. It doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be wonderful, just sketch it out. And this is for a few reasons. One, it's just to give you a framework and a blueprint to work towards. Because if you know that they're just looking for a map and a number, that's a different type of work than if they're saying, I want a map and a gauge and a chart and 5 numbers. Like just getting that same, like on the same page about what are we making, what's most important and why. And then secondly, how it should be organized, because typically folks will want to see the big, most important thing first or largest or up top, and then maybe other things that are useful, but maybe not as important lower down. So taking that time to sit with your contact and like map it out. Like these are just 2 pictures of sketches folks have done. These are from the internet, not our specific ones, but they didn't spend a lot of time. They just said, you know, we want these 3 numbers up here. We want a couple filters up here. Oh, and I'm pretty sure this is a US map. It doesn't, like, it looks enough like the US for a prototype. And you draw it out and say, this is what we're thinking. You get on that same page. You then have your blueprint of what you're working towards. You've also, through that process, you should ask a few questions like, what's the most important thing here? If there's only like, if all of this, if there's 9 blocks on here, what if we can only get to half of them? Which are the half that are most important? I mean, your goal is to build the whole prototype, but sometimes with time and limitations and just unexpected things, which we'll talk about that come up along the way, maybe you can only get halfway in the time provided. So you also have that immediate feedback of what's priority versus what's maybe not. And this helps guide you the rest of your way, because otherwise, and I know Sandra, myself, and many others have this from experience of if you don't have this prototype, you then build something, you spend a lot of time building it, and you bring it to the person, they go, that's not what I was thinking. Or how about you change this, 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 but by the time you get through their list, it's changing everything. So you might as well have started over. So this prototype is huge. It takes 10 minutes. It doesn't need to take more than 10 minutes, and it makes life so much easier.
Oh, and Matt, you know, I'm sorry, just one thing to add there too, is that people have seen other people's dashboards, right? So when you're sitting down with the person, with your audience member, they'll be like, oh, I saw a chart that went like this, you know, that had changes over time and enrollment over time. That was really cool. And things like that. So it's not like you're going to be starting from scratch when you're sketching down like that. They'll have seen stuff that they want to see again. Sorry for interrupting, Matt.
Oh, no, that's excellent. Thank you. I mean, even if I've never done this before, but it's a great idea. If somebody has a request, say, can you bring me an example of what you're thinking? That also works as a prototype, because then they can say, this is exactly what I'm imagining. I saw this other organization do it. And that could just simply be your initial prototype. We'll talk a little bit about managing expectations later, but if they do bring you something that glows and dances and is amazing, just make sure to point out that's probably their 20th iteration of that dashboard, but it could be a great starting point. And like Sandra and I both mentioned at the beginning, we're not digging into any specific tool today, but at the end we'll re-highlight the link to a walkthrough of how to use Power BI that Sandra and I have done that walks you through how from data import to building visualizations. But what we really want to stop and talk about is pick the right tool for your moment. There are so many data visualization tools out there, from free mapping tools to expensive mapping tools to dashboard tools that are free like Power BI, or at least that have free versions. Actually, Power BI and Tableau both have free versions, but the paid versions do a little bit more. There's so many tools out there. Sometimes all you need is Excel and building a nice chart in Excel, and it's a combination of 2 or 3 charts in Excel, and you copy it into a PowerPoint. Like, there's no right or wrong best tool to always use. I think Sandra and I, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sandra, like Power BI, and our organizations like Power BI because baseline, it's free. You can get the paid version if you want to do more with it, but it does a lot. Its learning curve is less than other tools. But think about what tools you know, what your organization has, and your time frame of, let's say you need to turn around a map in a week. There's a lot of online mapping tools where you tell it, highlight this state, this state, this state, this state, and in about 10, 20 minutes, you have a really basic US map with just states highlighted. And maybe if you just have a week and you don't know Power BI, you don't know Tableau, you don't know those tools, maybe that's the right tool for that moment. But otherwise, let's just say your organization already uses this really great visualization tool. You maybe just don't know it, but you have a few weeks, you have a few colleagues who could train you, and maybe that's the most accessible tool for you to use. Really think about that. Think about what's the goal, what do you need to deliver, how much time do you have, which tools are you most familiar with and comfortable with? Do you really have time to learn something new, or do you really just need to knock it out and just be realistic with it? I know that's also kind of vague. Since there are so many tools, it makes it hard to, well, I've never used a mapping tool, where do I begin? That's definitely a hard one. If you have, sometimes just a Google search of easy, like if you have a quick turnaround searching easy US mapping tool or easy fill in your blank state, country, whatever mapping tool online, you're going to find a lot of free and simple stuff. If you need more complicated stuff, then you want to plan in some time for learning and selecting a tool. Sandra, would you add anything to that? Like it's kind of a lot.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I worked in HIV surveillance for a long time, and there was just no tracking. I set up a whole tracking mechanism, and nobody wanted to use my fancy software. Like, I'm a data nerd. I've got fancy software. They all wanted to use Excel. So I made an entire tracking, system in Excel with some dashboard graphs, and it was done. And it took a while to set up, but that's what they wanted, and it worked fine.
Great, thank you. And I saw a question came in the chat, and if we're sharing slides, I know the slides went out in today's announcement email, but in follow-up.
Right, I could send a follow-up, but if you had the announcement for today, the slides are there as a PDF, so you can download those.
Thank you. And then Sandra, I'm going to kick this back over your way.
So this is also a lot about the just the approach you're going to take. So hopefully you've been able to sit down, who your audience is, what things should look like. So you're going to develop version 1, and you're going to not sweat the formatting until the content is done. They're going to say, I like a little lighter shade of blue, the lines aren't perfectly aligned. This is absolutely true. You're going to get all that feedback. But you know what? That minute formatting takes up most of the time with the dashboard facts, and it will drive you crazy. You can spend, I think, Matt, you have a quip, right? Like that formatting and perfecting a dashboard will take as much time as you give it. And that's usually when I mutter something like forever, and like the ghost voice. So all you want to do is you just want to be really clear and upfront. And you limit, again, you're limiting the scope. You're like, right now we're doing the content. All the formatting minutia, I'm writing it down, but right now we're talking about perfecting the content. When we get the content right, we'll get all the colors and lines and alignment and everything right. So, and it's always my thing about like papers, like when you write an academic paper, if you're like, well, a limitation of this paper is that, we didn't have X. No one can be like, well, you don't have X. You're like, well, yeah, but I said I don't have X. So then you can turn around the content, get the content right, and then do the formatting. Because if you try to do the content and the formatting while you're iterating the content, then it's going to take you 15 times as long, right? You really want to work on the colors and the alignment when the content's set, and make that expectation clear. Okay. Next slide. So you will receive a long list of requests, and this is awesome. People always have ideas, they always have requests, but you will get that long list of requests. And what I always like to say is you just put it into the idea bank, right? And you prioritize the idea bank. In an Agile framework, we call this the backlog. It doesn't matter. It's an idea bank. It's a list of tasks that you have to do. But the important thing is if someone goes, oh, this dashboard is neat, but X, Y, Z, the color should be this, the content should be that, you have now 25 requests on your plate. And it's like they all have the same importance. That's not going to work. You're never going to deliver anything. And if you do deliver it, it's going to be 18 months from now, and you're going to want something different. So the important thing is this this chart up on the corner there, where it's like, discover, prototype, test, iterate. And MVP means the minimum viable product. That's your prototype. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to rank order the requests with your audience based on the delivery of that minimum viable product, your prototype. And again, so if you rank those requests, like I hear you about a lighter blue, you know, I'm going to get the content correct first, but I'm keeping the, you know, lighter blue on my to-do list, right? I will get to the lighter blues after I'm done perfecting the content. That will actually mean that you can turn around the content faster, right? The lighter blue is still on your to-do list and you just make it totally explicit. Lighter blue's on my to-do list, but right now I'm working on content. And then you tackle those requests in order. And if they want the next iteration, say, especially based on content in like a week or two, you'd be like, well, I'll have the content. When I get the content done, I have all of your great feedback about a lighter blue and alignment is still in my to-do list. Okay. That is, I think, my favorite part about an Agile framework is the idea bank. Okay. So good practices and things to remember. We're going to focus on one deliverable at a time. And again, this is like, people get so much brainstorming. You know, you did that initial discovery and that really helped you figure out who you're going to talk to and all that kind of stuff. But then every time you meet, you're going to get 18,000 comments. People are going to be brainstorming. Ideas are going to be pinging out of their brain. And this is fantastic because you're getting a lot of ideas, a lot of content about people who know what they're talking about and who know what they want to see. What about this? Oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could see this, you know, by that? It would totally be cool if we could see this by that. Let's just acknowledge that. But does it fit into this prototype? If it doesn't fit into this prototype, it goes into your good friend, the idea bank. And it was just like, so is that going to fit in this current prototype or in a future one? Future one. Ding, idea bank. When we do the next, you know, dashboard, we will put that into that dashboard, you know, that fits with that deliverable. So it's not that brainstorming is bad. Brainstorming is awesome. But brainstorming will take you like, you know, I would say Albuquerque because Bugs Bunny did that, but I can't say that anymore. So, and Echoes Global, so I don't know what I could say. It will take you like, you know, far away on like a 3-hour round trip, you know, out to the middle of nowhere and you're going to get lost. So that's why we just want to limit the brainstorming. Make notes of it, keep a log, and set it to the side for the next deliverable. So this is my thing that Matt lets me talk about every time that we talk. Now, again, I'm a data nerd, so I will say that this is very important. You want to keep raw data raw. So I keep a raw data folder, and in there I have all the stuff from the iEcho, you know, website with the data downloads. You know, I have contacts and clinics and everything like that, but I keep it as a raw download. And then, so no matter what else you do, always keep your clearly labeled raw data. There are some people who, you know, you know, it's fine. Like you copy and paste little bits of data, you know, here and there into like different spreadsheets, trying to like filter down to what you want to talk about. And that's, if that works for you, that's what works for you. But please do keep a raw data tab. This is for the Sandra of the future. So someone's going to come along. She's going to be the next data nerd or whatever, the next you. You know, if you move up in the organization, or, you know, or move sideways, whatever. And she's going to want to do things a little bit differently than you did them. So if you keep the data raw, that person can backtrack to what you were doing and maybe change it and alter it in the future. So in my data nerd life, I have a raw data. I process it with SAS code, and then I output it to the process data. And even if you're in Excel, if you have multiple tabs, just keep a raw tab. All right.
Just to echo that, yeah, the backwards engineering of things, we'll get this in a minute or so, but the being able to see what you did last time, use that as a template and a starting place and trying to figure out what was done last time, whether it's you or another team member, there's so much value there. So really keep your raw data raw and keep it next to the process data. Yeah. So just a few other best practices and then we'll wrap from there is keep it simple. So you can build all the bells and whistles into what you're building. But if the person really just needs a chart, like they need a chart about what Pac-Man is or not Pac-Man, you can build, like this is effective and simple and eye-catching and it conveys the message and it wasn't fancy. This is something that you could build in Excel. Really think about what's the answer, the question you're trying to answer, what's the right format that your audience is looking for, and keep it simple. That's the key. Because and I'll say it one more time, you could spend as much time formatting and building and adding bells and whistles. So many analogies for that. That like for gold plating on things, you could do so many of those things. But often when you have a visualization request or a dashboard request, you have a limited amount of time. So really focusing on what's the core message that needs to be responded to, getting that content right, building the most useful chart, graph, whatever, map, whatever, and getting that out and ready and used and having feedback along the way, that's key. So don't get caught up. You can get caught up in all the gold plating. Just try your best not to, because then, like Sandra mentioned, you'll end up on a long journey that is kind of distracting from where you're trying to go. Another quick thing, data visualization is not magic. A lot of the time it feels like, whoa, how did this map get made? Or how did this thing get made? Or how did this dashboard get made? Or what have you? But the key really is it takes a lot of time, a lot of data cleaning, because the first time you try to build something, chances are you're going to find some data cleaning issues. Like in our case in New Mexico, inevitably Albuquerque is spelled 3 different ways. So we always have to go back and say, let's clean up the Albuquerques and get them all spelt right. It just happens. So there's a lot of time cleaning, trying things out, making a version 1, getting feedback, making a version 2, getting feedback. You as the person doing the work, learning whether it's the tool, the process, or just learning. And then also a good amount of frustration and a good amount of joy. Like I know from my own space, I was working on a few maps these last few weeks, and I couldn't figure out how to make all the labels appear on, so it was a country map, and when there's a whole bunch of small countries, it only shows the name of the biggest country, but not the smallest countries. It probably took me 2 or 3 hours to figure out. And I realized if I Googled it sooner, I would have figured it out in about 10 minutes. But I definitely had the frustration of, this is taking forever, I can't figure out. The joy of figuring out, but also the realization of use Google, it's your friend. It'll help you save some time, because usually if you're using a common tool and you say, in Microsoft Power BI, how to do blank, you'll find a lot of resources online that save you time, and people have already done exactly what you're trying to do, or something similar enough where you'll have the steps outlined. So just know it's not something mysterious. It's really just somebody sitting down, figuring out what the goal is, and taking the time to do it, learn it, create it, iterate it. And I know some folks, this it comes more naturally of like, I'm just going to sit down for however many hours it takes and do this. For other folks, whether it's your job or your level of focus that day, you maybe can't do that. So just be really thoughtful about if you do have a limited time frame and you do have a lot to do, plan in that time, block that time, and figure out how much time you need to get that done for you, and always plan in a little bit extra. Like just always plan in a little bit extra. And then the last piece, and we've touched on this a little bit, is learn from every visualization that you make. So these are just 2 examples of 2 maps that we've been working on for our Miners Wellness program here at UNM that reaches across the country. This is an earlier version map that was built in a tool called R. And it took many, many days and a lot of computer programming to do the first time we made it. And it works, it's utilitarian, it conveys the message, but when you put it next to other maps, it may not be the prettiest. But what we learned is we did this map, when we built it, it was awesome, we were excited, it was the best map we ever made, this type of map. And then 6 months, a few years later, we've learned new tools, we've simplified things, as we've learned from every time we've made this map before. And now we're at this place of, we use a different tool called QGIS, like the letter QGIS, and we build this newer version of the map, which is conveying the same information, but it's a little bit more graphically pleasing, and it takes us about an hour or 2 to make because of the experience, the built up templates we've made, and just all the work that's led here. So whereas just make sure you're doing that, because a lot of your requests, if you get a map request today or a reporting request today, chances are it's worth always asking the question of, do they need this again, or do they think they'll need this again? Because chances are they may want it today, they may want it again in 6 months, 6 months again after that. They may want it weekly, they may want it once a year. Chances are a lot of these things are going to come up again. So if you save your original work, use it as a template, and then next time, start with that template, just plug in your new data, and then all that time from refiguring it out, like, because you're not reinventing the wheel, you could spend that time on formatting and learning and improving and iterating So you kind of make your future by saving what you've done, using it as a template next time. You save future you and future staff a lot of time, but it also then frees up time to get to that backlog that Sandra was mentioning of like, oh, well, what if we could change it to that other blue? Or what if we can tinker with this formatting? So, and every time you have a little bit more time to dig into that and refine your products and learn and make things simpler and faster. Definitely, I know between these two, there's quite a journey for us. I think if we mapped out our maps from maybe 4 years ago to now, you could really just see it took us a lot of time, space, but now it's simpler, effective, and prettier, which folks seem to like. But just learn from everyone that you do. I think with that, that's our walkthrough of the steps you want to take when you get a visualization request, and then some good practices to keep in mind. I know we wanted to open up for Q&A, but also ask, how are you doing? We covered a lot. There's a lot in this space. There's a lot processing. Does anybody have any questions, comments, any feedback on how you're doing, on how you're feeling about all this? Was this too much, too little? Yeah. And I know that was like 3 different questions, so I'm sorry. If you do have anything, feel free to unmute and just jump in.
It's just requests maybe for the future, if you'd like some hands-on stuff, then, you know, that's something that Matt and I really, really like working with other people. And if we could set up a time to do any hands-on thing, as long as it was kind of like, you know, scheduled. Or what do you need next?
This is Janice Steinberg. I have a question about the Miners Wellness map. You said that takes 2 hours. Could you repeat, did you say you did that in QGIS, or I'm familiar, I've heard of ArcGIS.
Yeah, so with this one, so this side was made in R, it's a capital letter R. This side was QGIS, it's so the letter Q, letter G, letter I, letter S. What we like that, it's a new tool for us. We've only been using it for maybe 2 months now. And I think, Sandra, you have some exposure to it too. What we like about it is it's completely free. It's an open source tool. It means it doesn't have as great a documentation as tools that you maybe need to pay for. But since it's free and really accessible, and it's very similar to other GIS tools. So if you know another tool, this one's pretty easy to learn. But we loved it because it's free.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. We lost the person on our team who was doing mapping, and so I'm wondering if this is something I want to start dabbling in. I think it's really interesting, but time. So this is certainly helpful.
Yeah, I would think, you know, I've done a lot of work in ArcGIS and in R. I've been trying to do a lot of mapping in R to move from ArcGIS. And I know from Matt's example here, I'm going to check out QGIS for sure. Because, yeah, the R learning curve is too steep for maps, I think.
And just to add to that, when it comes to picking your right tool in the right place, this left-hand map took computer programming to make, whereas the right-hand side, it was all user interface and no programming, no coding. So, I mean, think about your team. When we made this earlier map, we had a programmer who could do this. And so it made sense and it was doable and it was the most reasonable thing at the time. But as we've had in more and more map requests and more team members who aren't necessarily programmers, finding a tool that was non-programmer friendly became really important for us. Other questions or thoughts? I know we usually, let's see.
Jim, do you want to unmute and share your comment?
Sure. So at the MetaEcho conference last year, I attended the session that you guys did and really loved Power BI and all of its possibilities. But have tried to work on it myself, and just everything I do is frustrating. And I've tried Google videos, I've tried all kinds of things, but would love to have, if there's a possibility of some more sort of hand holding through the basic processes just to get the data to do something.
Yeah, excellent, Jim. Absolutely. I think Sandra and I can definitely schedule a time. We like to do groups. So it's like instead of 4 or 5 one-on-ones, it'd be great to do like a group setting. But I think it'd be great if we could schedule some sort of deeper dive, hour and a half, to run through it in a small group. Is there? Oh yeah, go on, Sandra.
Oh, you know, it's and I know that was one of the things we talked about today, knowing that if today was going to be about the process, right? Like, you know, sort of best practices of how to approach making a dashboard without losing your mind completely, then, you know, the next steps would be, you know, would anyone be interested in sort of a workshop? And you know, if you download Power BI beforehand, we get some data, we can all workshop that together.
This is Stephen at the Echo Institute. Actually, if anybody's interested in a workshop, go ahead and chat your name, type workshop - your name, and I'll get that list over to Matt and Sandra. Maybe that'd be a little bit more helpful, Matt.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
So that we can make sure that we collect everyone's information and get that follow up with you. I know Matt, on their presentation, there was a reference, which you also have the link to if you download the PDF. Here's a list of helpful links if you want to talk about them.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So on here, I know there's a lot and they're really small, but if you have the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click through them. The very first one is actually a recording of the session Sandra and I did at the last Meta Echo. So post session, we reran through it together on Zoom, recorded that session and walked through everything. So if you need just a intro to Power BI, this is a great place to start. And then we'll do that. And then I imagine our workshop, we'll collect all the names, find a time. We'll be a little bit more advanced than this. So any folks join the workshop, we'll do some of the basics in that, but I will try to lean a little bit more into the nitty gritty. And this box, this very first one, is really the how-to and basics. So that'd be a good thing to do ahead of that.
And Matt, this is Rachel. Once you get it scheduled, in the invite you could send out the link so people have it as homework to do before, just to make sure, so they don't have to all dig through Box. I'm sure it's wonderful and easy to find, but
That's
in case it's not.
That's awesome. Yes, we can add that.
Yeah, I was going to say that if we do a hands-on workshop for an hour and a half, you know, the homework beforehand would be make sure, you know, Power BI desktop is downloaded. Yeah. We did do some off the cuff at Meta Echo, you know, of like helping people download Power BI, but yeah, and we could do that because there were 2 of us running around the room, but I think in a virtual format, we're going to insist on homework.
This is Steve, and I assume it'd probably be helpful to download a data set.
Yeah, we could send along the test data set that we've used, which is it's a data set from IECO, but it's fake people, fake data, but it's structured in the same way as the data that comes out of IECO. And that way you can test it with that data set. But also if you want to use your own IECO data set, you could use your own as well. And then one other link, I'm not going to talk through all the links on here, but the first one is that older workshop. The second one is how to download the free version of Microsoft Power BI Desktop. So you can in Google just search Microsoft Power BI Desktop and it'll be the first thing that comes up. But if you need, here's the link as well. And then most of the other things here are great learning resources. Specifically for Power BI, we love it because it's free, but a few other resources that are just about good solutions, apps, and other tools as well. So feel free to tinker with those. And then on our last slide, and I'm going to stop the share. When you have the slides, both Sandra and my contact information are in here as well. So also, before I stop the share, it's here. You'll have it in the PDF. Please feel welcome to reach out to us as well. And then we'd be happy to chat.